Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going back in time to pre-World War I, Europe,
Oh,
a continent just brimming with tension and ready to explode.
yeah.
And believe it or not, this is a place where something as small as a fly whisk could set off a chain reaction that leads to war.
That's right. It might sound crazy, but that's history for you, full of the unexpected.
It really is. So today we're going to sort of try to untangle this web of events and decisions that ultimately led to the outbreak of World War I, a war that reshaped the entire world. And to help us with this incredibly complex task we have with us, our expert who can, I assure you, make even the most confusing historical puzzle completely captivating.
Well, thank you for that. I do find this period of history especially fascinating because it really shows us how these seemingly isolated incidents can actually have really huge global consequences.
I completely agree. So to really understand how Europe ended up in this devastating conflict, we need to rewind all the way back to 1815, the year of the Congress of Vienna.
Yes, the Congress of Vienna was essentially Europe's attempt to kind of hit the reset button after the Napoleonic Wars. They were really trying to create a lasting peace and prevent another huge war across the continent.
So they created this Concert of Europe, right? A system designed to maintain a balance of power and resolve disputes peacefully. But how effective was it really?
Well, that's something that historians still debate today. Some see it as a period of genuine stability, while others argue that it was just a temporary pause before an even bigger conflict.
Sort of like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, I
Yeah,
guess. Holding things together for a little while, but not really addressing the real problem underneath.
that's a great analogy. The Congress of Vienna may have redrawn borders and restored monarchies, but it didn't actually erase the underlying tensions and ambitions of all the major powers.
And it was during this time that a really key figure emerged, Otto von Bismarck, the man who unified Germany. He was a brilliant strategist, but also quite a manipulator, wasn't he?
Absolutely. Bismarck was a firm believer in realpolitik, a political philosophy that really prioritized pragmatic power over ethical concerns or traditional diplomacy.
So he was willing to play a little rough to get what he wanted, even if it meant bending the rules.
Let's just say that Bismarck wasn't afraid to be ruthless in pursuit of what he believed was best for Prussia and later a unified Germany. His strategy often involved provoking wars like the one against Austria in 1866.
And of course, there's that famous Ems telegram incident where he basically edited a diplomatic message to provoke France into declaring war.
The Ems telegram is a perfect example of Bismarck's cunning. By very carefully changing just a few words in a message between the Prussian king and the French ambassador, he was able to really inflame tensions and make France look like the aggressor.
Talk about a power move. And the Franco-Prussian War really had a big impact, right? It led to the unification of Germany and the annexation of Alsace-Lorraine, which just made the resentment between France and Germany even worse.
Yeah. Exactly. Bismarck's actions definitely helped unify Germany, but they also planted the seeds for future conflict by disrupting the balance of power and making those existing rivalries even deeper.
So now we have a newly unified and very ambitious Germany entering the scene, which definitely shook things up. But there was another empire, a once mighty force, that was having trouble just staying afloat. The Ottoman Empire, often called the sick man of Europe.
Yes, the Ottoman Empire was once huge and powerful, but by the 19th century it was facing a ton of challenges. Internal rebellions, economic decline, and increasing pressure from European powers who were very eager to take advantage of its weakness.
Sounds like the empire was being pulled apart from both the inside and the outside.
Exactly. It was a perfect storm of problems, and the European powers were ready and waiting to pounce.
And this is where our fly whisk incident comes into play, right?
Yeah.
That seemingly insignificant event that sparked a much bigger conflict.
It might seem ridiculous, but it really shows how even small events can escalate quickly in a tense political climate. In 1830, a diplomatic incident between the French consul and the Dey of Algiers, which involved a fly whisk, believe it or not, became the excuse for a French invasion of Algeria.
Wait, so a disagreement that could have probably been settled over a cup of coffee turned into a full-blown invasion.
It really highlights the underlying tensions and imperial ambitions of the time. France had been interested in Algeria for a while, and this incident, however small, gave them the reason they needed.
It's amazing how one tiny event can set off a chain reaction with such huge consequences.
And the decline of the Ottoman Empire wasn't just about territory. It also fueled a rise of nationalism in the Balkans, as different ethnic groups within the empire started demanding independence.
So the Ottoman Empire, while weakening, became a focal point for these tensions that would eventually contribute to World War I. But it's important to remember that the seeds of this conflict were being sown all across the continent, and the repercussions would be felt globally.
Absolutely. While most of the fighting happened in Europe, World War I wasn't just a European war. Its impact was felt around the world, from the trenches of France to the colonies in Africa and Asia. And even before the U.S. officially joined the war, it was already pretty deeply involved in the conflict because of its economic ties to Europe, especially Great Britain and France.
Right, American businesses were giving loans and supplies to the Allied powers,
Mm.
which, kind of made it tough for the U.S. to really stay neutral.
You're absolutely right. It's like trying to stay dry when you're standing in the middle of a downpour.
Exactly. And of course, all of that tension boiled over with Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare campaign, the policy that ultimately led to the sinking of the Lusitania, a British passenger liner with American citizens on board.
The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 was a huge turning point. It really outraged American public opinion and started to shift things towards intervention.
It's hard to even imagine the shock and horror that must have gone through the nation when news of the sinking broke. It really brought the war much closer to home for Americans.
It did. And that incident, along with continued attacks on American ships, really escalated tensions between the U.S. and Germany.
And then the final straw, the Zimmermann telegram. That secret message from Germany to Mexico proposing an alliance against the United States. It's almost unbelievable, isn't it?
The Zimmermann telegram was a desperate gamble by Germany, and it backfired. Big-time British intelligence intercepted it and leaked it to the U.S. government, which just further inflamed public opinion and created this real sense of urgency.
So by 1917, the U.S. was at a crossroads facing this really complicated web of economic interests, increasing tension with Germany, and mounting pressure from the American people. It was a situation that forced the nation to make a huge decision: stay neutral or join the fight.
And that decision, as we all know, had a major impact not just on the United States, but on the whole world.
It really did. And in April of 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war, marking a pivotal moment in American history.
It was a decision that came after years of careful thought and ultimately reflected how public opinion had changed and the growing feeling that neutrality was no longer possible.
And after a lot of debate, Congress voted to declare war on Germany, officially bringing the United States into World War I.
The U.S. entering the war had a big impact on how things played out, both militarily and strategically. It tipped the balance of power in favor of the Allies and gave them a much-needed morale boost.
Before we get too deep into America's involvement in the war, let's step back for a moment and think about another part of World War I that often gets overlooked amidst all the political maneuvering and battle tactics. I'm talking about the unprecedented technological advancements that completely changed how wars were fought.
It's important to understand how these advancements in technology contributed to the huge number of casualties and that long stalemate of trench warfare. Weapons like machine guns, repeating rifles, and heavy artillery had never been used on this scale before.
It's chilling to think about the sheer firepower that was unleashed on the battlefields of Europe. Those weapons basically made traditional offensive tactics obsolete, leading to horrific losses and, of course, that infamous stalemate of trench warfare.
Exactly. Trench warfare became the defining feature of World War I. Millions of soldiers stuck in these elaborate trench systems, facing constant bombardment disease and the ever-present threat of death.
The conditions in the trenches were just awful. A nightmare of mud rats and that constant fear of enemy attack. It's hard to even comprehend the physical and psychological toll it took on the soldiers.
It really shows you the resilience of the human spirit, but it also highlights the really dehumanizing nature of modern warfare. Millions of lives were lost or forever changed in those trenches, and the impact on entire societies and nations was deep and long-lasting.
And it's so important to remember that behind those staggering casualty numbers were individual human beings, each with their own story, their own dreams, families left behind to grieve. The human cost of this war can't be overstated.
Absolutely. We have to try to connect with the personal stories of those who went through all of this, like memorials such as the blood-swept lands and seas of red at the Tower of London. Those are such powerful reminders of the immense human cost of war.
The installation of almost 900,000 ceramic poppies, each one representing a British or colonial soldier who died in the war, is such a moving tribute. It really brings home the scale of the loss in a way that numbers just can't.
You're right. And on a more individual level, there's the story of the Pembroke College War Memorial, which lists the names of all the students who died in the conflict. Each name a life cut short, a future that never happened.
Those stories, those tangible reminders of individual lives lost, they really help us grasp the true weight of the war's impact, an impact that went far beyond the battlefields and into the very heart of societies.
The economic damage was immense. Political systems were completely shapen, and the social fabric of nations was changed forever.
It was a major turning point in history, the end of an era and the beginning of a new world order, one filled with both challenges and opportunities.
And as we continue to explore this, we'll see how these events, how these interconnected threads of history ultimately led the United States to become a global leader, a role it's still grappling with today.
It's a legacy that comes directly from the nation's experience in World War I, a conflict that tested its strength, reshaped its identity, and put it on the world stage in a way it could never have imagined just a few years earlier.
Yeah, it really is amazing how a nation that was so focused on neutrality and isolationism ended up right in the middle of a global war.
It just goes to show that history rarely follows a straight line. And events, they just have a way of unfolding in ways we don't expect, sometimes dramatically so. But like we talked about earlier, even before the U.S. officially declared war, it was already deeply involved in the conflict, both economically and ideologically.
Right. The U.S. had these really strong economic ties to the Allied powers, especially with Great Britain and France. And those ties, well, they made it almost impossible to stay completely neutral.
It's like, watching your neighbor's house catch fire. You may not want to get involved at first, but eventually you realize those flames could spread, and you just can't stand by and watch.
That's a perfect way to put it. And in the case of the U.S., the flames were spreading both literally and figuratively with Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare campaign.
Yeah, the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, a British passenger liner with more than 100 American citizens on board, was a harsh reminder that this war could reach across the Atlantic and affect American lives directly.
Absolutely. The Lusitania incident sparked outrage and fueled a lot of anti-German feeling in the U.S. It also really highlighted just how difficult it was to stay neutral in a world that was becoming increasingly interconnected through global trade and communication.
The U.S. government protested strongly, demanding an end to unrestricted submarine warfare. And, for a while, Germany did back down. They were worried that more attacks on American ships would force the U.S. into the war.
But the pressure of that naval blockade by the British was really hurting Germany. And in early 1917, they made the decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare. They were gambling that they could cripple the British economy before the U.S. could really get involved.
It was a risky gamble that didn't pay off. And then, of course, there was the Zimmermann telegram, that secret diplomatic communication that revealed Germany's attempt to get Mexico to join them against the United States.
Yeah, the Zimmermann telegram was like throwing gasoline on an already hot fire. It created this real sense of urgency and convinced a lot of Americans that staying neutral wasn't an option anymore, that the U.S. had to do something to protect its interests and its security.
It's fascinating to see how all these events, from the fly whisk incident to the thinking of the Lusitania to the Zimmermann telegram, how they all played a part in shaping public opinion and ultimately pushing the U.S. toward war.
It really shows how interconnected everything is and how these seemingly isolated incidents can actually have a huge impact on the world stage.
And so in April 1917, the United States, a nation founded on the ideas of liberty and self-determination, found itself joining a global conflict, a war that would test its strength, redefine its role in the world, and leave a lasting impact on the 20th century and beyond.
It's a story that still matters today. As we deal with the complexities of a globalized world, the challenges of keeping peace in uncertain times, and the human cost of conflict, which is something we can never forget.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the lead up to America's entry into World War I. It's a complicated story, but one that offers us valuable insights into the forces that shape our world and the decisions that shape our destiny.
It's been great exploring this really pivotal time in history with you.
And to our listeners, we hope you keep exploring too. Keep asking questions and never stop searching for a deeper understanding of the past, because understanding the past helps us navigate the present and create a better future.
And maybe by learning from the mistakes and the successes of those who came before us, we can work towards a world where the horrors of World War I are never repeated.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us again soon as we continue our journey through history.